Vienna, 1907. Just as a late spring rain glazed the tiled roofs of Schönbrunn Palace, and the imperial guards changed shifts at the Neptune fountain. The letter was hidden beneath 3 layers of silken court stationery, bound in the red wax seal of the Qing dynasty. It wasn't meant to reach the emperor's son, but it did. Julien Markham, 22, heir to Archduke Leopold's private diplomatic office and the only son of the Emperor Franz Joseph's third cousin, unfolded the Mandarin script with trembling fingers. He'd been trained in languages since the age of 5, and though he read slowly, the meaning was clear. The letter had been meant for his father's superior. It was a final plea from the Meiji court sealed 6 weeks earlier in Beijing, requesting a secret envoy to mediate a border skirmish between Japan and Qing China. But what caught Julien's breath was not the politics. It was the name signed at the bottom. Lady Genmei Hanako, daughter of Prince Hanako Ichiro, a Meiji noble stationed in Manchuria. She had written of peace, yes, but tucked between the lines was something else entirely. A description of a garden in Kyoto where her mother once told her the world could be made new. Of how she had watched Austro-Hungarian soldiers pass, their coats drenched in snow, and wondered if any of them knew loneliness like hers. Julien had read it 3 times before he decided. The letter must be answered. He wrote under the name of his father's secretary and arranged for the reply to be smuggled through the Japanese attaché in Prague. He didn't expect a return. He certainly didn't expect her next letter to arrive bound inside a hollowed-out book of poetry, sent to the Hofburg Library and addressed to the one who understood the garden. And he never expected her handwriting to feel more familiar than his own thoughts. By early May, they had exchanged 7 letters, each one more personal, each one more dangerous. On the evening of May 24th, Julien stood in the candlelit hall outside the Hofburg's diplomatic salon, watching the Japanese delegation descend the marble steps. He knew she was among them. He had studied her father's name enough to recognize the crest on the guard's sleeves. She was the last to descend. She wore a pale lavender kimono embroidered with silver cranes. Her hair was pinned with mother-of-pearl combs, and though she kept her gaze lowered, Julien saw her eyes lift just once as if drawn by something she could not stop. They met. For a moment no longer than a breath their eyes locked. Then she was gone, swept into the palace's eastern wing. That night, Julien left nothing to chance. He bribed a footman, used his father's seal to request a revised seating chart for the diplomatic banquet, and at precisely 9 in the evening, he stepped into the music salon where the pianoforte was being tuned. She was already there. Alone. Lady Genmei, he said softly, careful with the accent. She turned, startled but not afraid. You shouldn't know my name. You gave it to me. Her hand dropped to her side, fingers tightening. You're not who you pretended to be. No, Julien said. But neither were you. She looked at him fully then. You read my words. They changed me, he said. She didn't answer, but her silence was not cold. It was full. A string quartet began to tune in the adjoining room. Voices rose. Footsteps passed. But inside that narrow salon, they stood still. You risked everything, she said finally, to speak to me. You made me believe it was worth it. Her breath caught. They will separate us. Then we'll find another way. That night, Julien passed her a folded note hidden beneath a dish of honeyed almonds. It contained a single sentence. Midnight. The second terrace above the orangery. She came. The air smelled of orange blossoms and wet stone. She wore no ornament, only a dark shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. You shouldn't have asked me here, she said, though she didn't turn away. Julien stepped closer. I had to see if the garden was real. Genmei looked up at him. What if it is, but we're not allowed inside? Then we'll climb the wall. Her lips parted, just a little. He reached for her hand, gloved in soft silk, and barely touched her fingers. The contact was nothing, but it burned. I don't want letters anymore, she whispered. I want this. Then stay. They'll send me back to Japan in 3 days. My father already suspects. Then we have 3 days. She nodded once. And after? Julien looked out over the dark gardens, the city beyond glowing faintly with gaslights. There's a way, he said. I don't know it yet. But I swear to you, I'll find it. Genmei's hand closed over his. I believe you. The bells of the palace struck midnight. Far below, a guard called the changing of the watch. But on the terrace, 2 dynasties stood still, joined by a hidden letter, a shared vow, and the first touch of a love that would not be denied. The rain had lifted by morning, leaving a faint shimmer across the gravel paths of the palace's inner courtyard. Genmei stood beside a reflecting pool framed by columns of green-veined marble, the hem of her walking kimono lifting just above the damp stone. She held a folded paper fan, closed and used. The breeze stirred the scent of elderflower from the hedges. Julien approached from the covered colonnade, his overcoat unfastened, hair still damp from the mist. He didn't speak until he was close enough to see the faint tension in her throat. "I asked the librarian to misfile your father's genealogy chart," he said quietly. "It bought us 2 days." Genmei lowered the fan. "You shouldn't have risked that." "I know." She turned, gaze following the ripple of a koi beneath the water's surface. "My father's aide intercepted a message from Saigon. He suspects it has to do with me. If he confirms it, I'll be recalled before the delegation concludes." Julien's hand tightened at his side. "There's a steward in Trieste. He owes my family a debt. He can arrange passage on a neutral vessel. And if I vanish?" Her voice was steady. "He'll accuse your court of abduction. War has begun over less." Julien stood beside her now, their reflections cast side by side in the still water. "What if you left not in secret, but with sanction?" She blinked. "You mean a formal petition?" "My uncle has jurisdiction over certain imperial marriages. He's never used it for anything but Habsburg alliances. But I'm not European," Genmei said, her tone even. "And I'm not a bargaining piece." He looked down at the water. "I know. That's why I'd never ask for you. I'd ask with you." She was silent for a moment, then touched the edge of the stone basin. "There's a scroll in my family's shrine. It records the first Hanako to marry outside Japan. A Portuguese navigator. They called her a traitor, but she died with his name still carved into her ring." Julien raised his gaze. "Would your mother support you?" "She would have," Genmei said softly. "She died during the cholera winter. I was 16. He said nothing, only nodded once. Then, carefully, he held out a packet of documents wrapped in linen. "I took these from the provincial archives. They prove that the Austro-Hungarian Empire recognizes dual citizenship for diplomatic unions if both parties request it under mutual consent." Genmei didn't take them. "You're prepared to make this legal. I'm prepared to make it real." She stepped closer, the tips of her shoes nearly touching his. "Then you must meet my father." Julien's eyes lifted. "As what?" She tilted her chin slightly. "As a man who believes his future is not bound to a single crown." That evening, Julien waited in the antechamber outside Prince Hanako's suite, the clicking of the clock marking each second like flint. A servant opened the lacquered door, bowing low. Inside, the prince stood before a folding screen painted with cranes and pine trees, dressed in court silks. His expression was unreadable. Julien bowed low and remained there. "You are not the one my aide was told to expect," the prince said in French. "I came in his place, Highness." "And why is that?" Julien straightened. "Because I'm the one who must speak for myself." The prince's eyes narrowed. "You write like a scholar, but you maneuver like a courtier. I was raised to be both." The prince stepped forward, folding his hands behind his back. "And yet you presume to speak of my daughter as though she were yours to claim." Julien's voice never wavered. "I claim nothing. I offer." The prince studied him. Then, unexpectedly, he motioned to the servant. A scroll was placed between them on a table of carved sandalwood. "This is the Hanako record," the prince said. "When you write your name beside hers, it will remain there for generations. If your empire turns on mine, your children will carry both burdens." Julien reached for the inkstone and brush. "Then let them carry it with honor." The brush scratched lightly against the parchment. When it was done, the prince nodded once and left the room. Genmei stepped in only after the door had closed. "You did it?" she asked, voice barely above breath. Julien turned, the brush still in his hand. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. She looked down at the scroll. "That's more than I hoped for." He reached for her hand not with urgency, but with quiet certainty. "There's a chapel in Mariazell," he said. "The archbishop there is under my uncle's authority. If your father grants blessing, we can be wed before the delegation returns to Tokyo." Genmei looked at him fully, her fingers threading through his. "Then we have until Sunday." Outside, the bells of the Hofburg struck once, twice echoing across the rooftops like a promise. The carriage to Mariazell left at dawn, its narrow wheels cutting through the wet gravel beyond the city's outer ring. Genmei sat beside Julien, her hands folded beneath a traveling cloak of dark plum wool, her gaze steady on the forested road unwinding ahead. Neither of them spoke until the firs swallowed the last of Vienna's rooftops and the sound of hooves softened beneath the pine needles. He studied her profile, the line of her jaw, the way her eyes followed the shift of light through the canopy. She hadn't slept. He knew because he hadn't either. "You've never seen snow fall in these mountains," he said finally, voice hushed against the hush of the trees. "Only from a distance," she answered. "The first time was from a train window passing through Salzburg. I thought it looked like silk unraveling in the wind." He smiled, just slightly. "The priest at Maria Zell is a cousin of my mother's chamberlain. He's kept quiet about more dangerous unions." Genmei turned to him. "There are others like us?" "There were," he said. "Not many." She nodded, thoughtful. "In my uncle's house, there's a screen painted with lovers who cross a river by walking over falling blossoms. The story says they can only cross when they move at the exact same pace." Julien leaned forward. "Then we'll match each step." The carriage climbed steadily, the path narrowing as snow from the previous week's storm melted in slow rivulets along the rocks. By mid-morning, the abbey's white spires pierced the mist ahead, rising between cliffs like a vision half-remembered. Inside, the chapel smelled of cedar wax and old stone. Genmei stepped into the nave first, her boots silent on the mosaic floor. A single stained glass window cast a wash of amber light across the altar. Julien joined her at the front. The priest, a quiet man with a soft Austrian accent, said little. He examined the scroll they brought, nodded once, and withdrew to prepare the chamber of vows. "Are you afraid?" Julien asked, his voice low. "No," Genmei said, "but I feel as if I'm stepping through a door that will never open the same way again." He touched her hand bare now and folded his fingers around hers. "Then let's close it behind us." They stood in silence until the priest returned. The ceremony was brief. No music, no audience, only the echo of their names spoken aloud in that cold, high chamber. When it was done, the priest offered them a small silver cross on a chain. Julien accepted it, then turned to Genmei. "This isn't your faith," he said, "but I'd like you to have it if you want it." She studied it a moment, then placed it in her satchel. "I'll keep it with the ribbon from my mother's comb. They'll stay together." They left the chapel just as the first flakes of new snow began to fall. Julien helped her into the carriage. The air had turned sharp, the clouds heavy with light. They did not return to Vienna. By dusk, they had reached a stone manor nestled against a frozen lake, a retreat once owned by Julien's grandfather. It had not been occupied in years, but a fire had been lit. The steward waited with hot broth and dry wool. Genmei walked slowly through the quiet parlor, her hand brushing against the faded tapestries and the carved railing of the stair. "I didn't think it would be like this," she said. "Like what?" "So quiet. So deliberate. As if the world is holding its breath." He stood beside her. "It is. Because we've changed it." She turned then, her brow furrowed. "My father will come," she said. "Not with anger, but with expectation. He'll want to see that this isn't a gesture." Julien folded his coat over the back of the chair. "Then we show him it's a beginning." Genmei took a step closer. "I didn't marry to make a point. I know. I did it because I want to build something that neither court can undo." He reached for her hand again, and this time, she wove her fingers between his. "Then we start with this house," he said, "and the time we have before the world finds us." The fire crackled softly behind them. Outside, the snow deepened, covering the road that led down to the valley. No word had come from the palace. No summons, no decree. Only the quiet and the warmth between their hands, and the knowledge that they had stepped forward together. The lake had thawed by the third week. Pale reeds shifted along the shoreline, and the last of the ice broke into long, glassy ribbons that drifted quietly beneath the birch trees. Genmei stood at the edge of the dock, her sleeves rolled above her wrists, watching a pair of deer approach the water's edge across the bank. Julien was behind her, sleeves unbuttoned, carrying a cedar crate filled with early vegetables he had helped the steward lift from the greenhouse. "They've come down every morning since the snow melted," she said without turning. "They'll disappear when the roads open again. Everything will." He set the crate down beside her. "Not everything." She crouched, touching the dock's edge with her fingers. My father's aide left Vienna 2 days ago. There was no message, no seal. Just absence. Then they're watching. They always were. Her hand rested on the wood grain for a long moment. But now it's different. Now I've moved outside the lines they drew for me. Julien reached for the bundle of letters tucked beside the crate and offered her the one sealed with a wax imprint she hadn't seen before. She took it carefully, breaking the seal with her thumb. She read silently. When she looked up, her face was unreadable. He's written in my childhood dialect. That's never happened before. What does it mean? He wants to speak to me as his daughter, not as a subject under obligation. Julien waited. He's arriving at the end of the week. With one retainer. No military escort. That's a sign. It's a test, she said, rising. One I intend to pass. They spent the next days preparing the house with quiet purpose. Genmei asked the steward to bring her the lacquer box she had left unopened since their arrival. Inside was a folded obi her mother had worn the year the emperor visited Kyoto. She laid it across the bed and smoothed the fabric with hands steady and precise. Julien stood in the doorway as she worked. You never told me what you used to dream of before all this. I didn't used to dream. She lifted the obi and held it to the light. I observed. I listened. I memorized what could not be spoken aloud. And now, I want a room with open windows. A table with books in 2 languages. A name that doesn't have to be justified. He walked toward her. Then we'll build that. The carriage arrived at noon on the appointed day. The horses were light-footed, the driver quiet. Genmei waited in the courtyard, her hair arranged in a single braid wrapped with a narrow ribbon of indigo silk. Julien stood behind her, but did not step forward. Her father descended without hesitation, wearing a traveling cloak the color of slate. His retainer remained seated. When he spoke, it was in their shared tongue, low and measured. You've made a choice I must now carry in my own record. Genmei bowed. I do not ask for your approval, only your understanding. He looked past her toward the house. You've placed yourself in a space that does not yet exist in either of our worlds. I'm not alone in it. The prince's eyes moved to Julien briefly, then returned to her. Then show me why it should be allowed to remain. They walked together through the house. Genmei guided him through the library, the conservatory, the sitting room where Julien had placed a lacquered box beside a shelf of political treatises. She did not speak in defense of her choices, only in description of what had grown in the stillness that followed them. Afterward, the prince asked to sit beneath the birch trees near the lake. Julien brought out a low table with tea and a simple plate of dried persimmon. Genmei poured without ceremony. Her father accepted the cup. You've kept the pacing of your mother's hands. I've kept what I could. Julien did not speak until the prince turned to him directly. You risked not only your name, but your country's favor. I did, Julien said calmly. Because what I've come to build with your daughter cannot be measured in titles or treaties. And yet you'll need both if you're to survive this. Then we'll do what's required. The prince nodded once. There's a ship leaving Trieste in 10 days. I will not be on it. Genmei's eyes flickered. You're staying? Only long enough to write the necessary letters. My superiors will not approve, but they will not be able to undo what I record officially. He placed a folded document on the table. It's a recognition of union. Not a blessing. But it will be filed in the imperial archives. Genmei reached for it slowly. Her father stood. I will say this only once. You are not lost to me. But you no longer belong to the world I was born to govern. She rose with him. Then let me help shape the one after it. He inclined his head, not quite a bow, but not less than one either. Julien watched him return to the carriage. The retainer followed without a word. The horses turned toward the road, and within moments, they were gone. Genmei stood beside the table, the document pressed to her chest. She didn't speak. Julien stepped beside her, his hand finding hers without question. The clouds shifted above the lake, casting a shaft of light across the treetops. They did not move. There was no need.